Hi everyone, welcome to the September 15th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look back at last week's racing from Kentucky Downs and Woodbine. Kentucky Downs ran 3 cards last week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Most of the major stakes races, though, took place on Saturday. We went over all of them in that TimeformUS forecast last week, where we went through the Pick 5 sequence, and we'll recap all of those races, some big purses on the line, a couple minor upsets, especially in that Kentucky Turf Cup, where Zulu Alpha, one of the top turf horses in the country, went down to defeat. We'll get to all of that in a little bit, though. And then at Woodbine, they ran the Queen's Plate, really the jewel of their season up there for the Canadian-bred 3-year-olds. Pretty big upset in there. I know a horse that Craig was a little bit interested in, as the 2 favorites couldn't quite get it done. Looks like an exciting 3-year-old, at least racing on the synthetic surface up there. And then there were also a couple of turf races that we'll discuss later in the show. But we'll start out at Kentucky Downs. And Craig, there was some rain that came throughout the day at Kentucky Downs on Saturday. And I think that maybe slowed down the turf course a little bit, and as the day wore on, maybe it affected some of the favorites later in the card.
Yeah, I definitely think it had an effect on some of the races. It went from pretty firm turf to yielding. It certainly wasn't or even I think they had it labeled as soft. It certainly wasn't a fun day for speed figure making. Kentucky Downs is always a challenge in its own right. And then when you throw in a course that's changing conditions throughout the day, it was a little bit tougher than your normal card at a regular track, but overall I'm pretty confident in the figs, and I do think we saw some pretty darn good performances.
Yeah, and let's go right in chronological order, beginning with the first leg of that Pick 5 sequence. That was the Kentucky Downs Ladies Turf, and overall, I thought the sequence played out pretty logically, and it started off with a favorite winning in Regal Glory. This is a race where I think pace had a lot to do with the outcome. Not that they were crawling up front, but they let Mitchell Rhodes sort of get away on a comfortable early lead, and Regal Glory had a little bit of trouble reeling her in, but she just asserted her superiority in the end.
Yeah, she did, and you can see, I mean, the first 2 ran 1-2 around the track, just switched positions a little late, so maybe I'd give an excuse to some others in behind. Both of the top 2 got 118 TimeformUS speed figures. I know we had talked about Mitchell Road and, of course, Regal Glory. I think we both thought she was pretty likely to win, but Mitchell Road I was a little down on, but she actually showed when she can get that early lead and be clear, she's still a force to be reckoned with, and I was impressed by her, how she really dug in when she got past. She didn't just give up like she's done sometimes in the past, and good effort from both of the top 2.
Yeah, I thought they both ran well. They obviously each handled the turf condition. Regal Glory had run over some turf with some give it in her prior starts when she had lost to Newspaper of Record. No horses like Newspaper of Record in this race, and I think that helped her win. You mentioned the trips a little bit, that maybe some others in behind were compromised. I mean, I liked Secret Message a little bit in this race, and she obviously didn't run one of her best races. I didn't love the ride that she got because she actually broke on top. And I know she's a closer, but I would like to see riders play the brake a little bit more, especially in a race where there's no pace going on, but they just dragged her back to last. And not just that, but she was out 4 wide the entire way with this uncovered trip at the back of the pack. That's just not going to be successful, especially in a race where there's not much pace up front. So she passed a few horses to be 5th, but I'd give her a pass for this race.
Yeah, she is the main one I was talking about when I said the pace. Just nothing set up for her. And, we had mentioned on the forecast, that was my negative about her, is I had a feeling she was going to get a tough trip because of the pace. And as you said, losing ground and uncovered is never ideal. So like I've mentioned before with these Kentucky Downs races, horses that don't run well for a variety of reasons, and sometimes there's not even a visual excuse. I just generally put a line through them because it's just such a different course than we see anywhere else. Sometimes you can get some prices off some ugly looking running lines.
We saw another favorite win in the very next race, the ladies' turf sprint, going the 6.5 furlongs, and Got Stormy, who had been a little bit of a disappointment throughout the first portion of the year. She had lost at some short prices. She got a perfect trip last time, albeit against the boys in the 4-star Dave. Couldn't quite get the job done against Halliday, but the dropping class really made the difference here as she cut back in distance, had no trouble handling the shorter trip as she sat a pretty good trip in behind horses. Tyler Gaffalione found some room to swing out at the top of the stretch, and the race was just over at that point.
Yeah, and this race really changed a bit when Kamari scratched. I think she's actually slated to run today. She's entered both Tuesday and Wednesday. But it made God Stormy just kind of tower over this field. The one upside I'd say for her that we hadn't seen before is the talk of her had always been that she liked a really firm, hard course like she got at Saratoga last year, but she certainly didn't get that here. She ran very well. She got a 1:16 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, so I think it's safe to say she's back in top form.
Yeah, I was kind of laughing about that because they were basically making the case early on in the year that she could run over nothing but like pavement. I mean, Mark Cass even said ahead of the 4-star Dave that the turf course wasn't firm enough for her when, I mean, they basically, I think they went 133 and change for that race. So that was getting a little ridiculous. I know traders sometimes like to build in excuses before a race for a variety of reasons, even if the excuse has no merit. But obviously, Got Stormy is way more versatile than her connections were giving her credit for. And not that she ran one of her best races here, but it was nice to see her get back to the winner's circle and nice to see her actually run through the finish line, because in some of her races she had been making that move to get there at the 8th pole and then just kind of flattening out late. I know it was softer competition, but at least she really finished this race off and looked good crossing the wire. So maybe this will be the confidence booster that she needs. I didn't see a whole lot among the horses in behind her. I guess you could say the runner-up Winning Envelope was by far the second best horse because she completely blew the start. She was off about 3 lengths slowly in this race and made a big run from the back of the pack to get up for second. She's just not really in Got Stormy's league, though, but it was a good effort to be second from her.
It was, and just one more note on Got Stormy. What I found funny with her all year is, in addition to the really firm turf course, is how they kept saying they didn't want to use her speed. They wanted to take her back, and I just never understood that. She's a fast horse. You want to use speed, even on turf, it can still be a weapon. And then they cut her back to a sprint where speed's at a premium, and hopefully they just let her run because that's what she does best: be up close and finish off the best she can.
In the next race, the Kentucky Downs Juvenile Turf Sprint, we had 10 two-year-olds running for $500,000, and Wesley Ward took home the lion's share of that purse as he had the top 2 finishers in this race. Really the 2 dominant horses in Outdoor and Fauci, and Outdoor got the best of his stablemate. This is a horse who's now 2 for 2 in his career. He looked good in his first start at Saratoga and followed it up with an even better performance here.
Yeah, he's starting to remind me a little bit of Four Wheel Drive, who I think was a Wesley Ward too, if I remember right. But yeah, just another good effort. He matched the 96 that he ran first time out. Honestly, it could have been better. It's really tough to make a figure for this race as the course was changing and they're 2-year-olds. So all you have is what they've done in the past. Fauci had also run a 96 last time. I think he got a 93 in here. So solid effort for 2-year-olds. I imagine they still have some catching up to do on that other Wesley Ward horse whose name I'm forgetting right now. But, good effort, and I imagine we'll see these in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint.
And I might be wrong about this, but I believe that Outdoor even has the same owner as Four Wheel Drive. So a lot of similarities between these two horses. I was encouraged that he ran a more professional race this time. While he won at Saratoga in his debut, I felt that he sort of did it on sheer talent. He never switched leads through the stretch of that race. In this Kentucky Downs effort, he switched leads on cue, really rammed through the wire to beat Fauci, who I thought ran as well as he did in his runner-up finish behind Golden Pal at Saratoga last time. He just ran into another stablemate that's a little bit better than he is. And these two were just so much better than the rest of these horses. They sat good trips stalking the pace, but nobody else really got into this race. The 2 big races at Kentucky Downs were the final 2 races on the card, both from interest standpoint in terms of division leaders running in the races and just from a purse standpoint as the $1 million Kentucky Turf Cup. We saw a bit of an upset as Zulu Alpha, who had actually won this race last year, upsetting Arklow, who was the favorite back in 2019. There was a reversal this year. Zulu Alpha was the big favorite going in, and Arklow, who had had trouble winning races recently, got back to the winner's circle and back to his best form here. Was able to hold off Zulu Alpha as well as an improving and returning Red Knight to get the job done here in pretty impressive fashion.
Yeah, it was quite an effort for him. He had blinkers on, which you don't often see for a 6-year-old. Usually by then they have him figured out, but it really seemed to have done the trick for him. He was up pretty close to the pace, and turning for home, it was pretty obvious nobody was catching him. I thought Red Knight ran very, very well off the layoff. Zulu Alpha was a little bit disappointing, but they all got pretty decent speed figures. Arklow got a 125, Red Knight a 124, and Zulu Alpha a 123 right down the line. So Just really good efforts for them, kind of fitting for $1 million purse that we would get those. I do want to comment, it's really cool. I'm a guy who grew up just loving dirt racing, never paid much attention to turf. But we saw the news this week about Honor AP being retired. And for me, that's the real downside with dirt racing. But you just don't see that with turf. And we're going to keep seeing horses like Arklow and Zulu Alpha. And there's just so many. I can't. Channel Maker's another win. Horses just keep running on turf. They match up over and over again. And I got to tell you, I'm really swinging to being more of a turf racing fan.
No, it's easy to be a fan when you have your favorite horses and they continue to run year after year and season after season. And yeah, it was kind of a bummer to see that news about Honor AP. I guess we could touch upon it briefly. I mean, he kind of was this horse that you always thought had so much potential and was going to be a good horse once he finally figured things out. And it was almost like they never gave him a chance to get there. As, I mean, he did get that Grade 1 victory in the Santa Anita Derby. But even in the Kentucky Derby, it seemed like he was still a little bit immature. Not able to really run the race that I think people were hoping he'd run, given the trip and some of his own antics. And I mean, now we're just never going to see it, as he'll be whisked away off to stud. They did not disclose what the injury was. That's a little disappointing. I wish sometimes connections would be a little bit more forthcoming, especially when horses are going to be standing at stud, what the injuries are with these horses. But obviously it was significant enough that he's not going to race again this year. And I guess there were no intentions to run him as a 4-year-old, which I don't understand, but I mean, I'm not the one paying the bills and making the financial decisions with these horses. So it's just kind of disappointing. But as you said, it's nice to see these turf horses stick around for so long. And just to comment on this race, with regard to Arklow, yeah, he got the jump on Zulu Alpha and was able to see out this trip. I think it's kind of funny that the top two finishers in here, Arklow and Red Knight, both were horses that competed going as long as 2 miles last year. I think they both ran in that Belmont Gold Cup going 2 miles, which, I mean, I just think is interesting because when the turf course gets so soggy like it did at Kentucky Downs, these longer races can really turn into tests of stamina. And it seemed like Arklow and Red Knight had the stamina at the end of the race, whereas Zulu Alpha looked like he was making a winning move at the top of the stretch and just kind of flattened out in the late stages. Maybe he wants a harder turf course. Maybe he just wasn't quite ready to fire his best shot. And as you said, maybe it was just one of those weird Kentucky Downs results. But I think all three of these horses ran pretty well. And the final race we'll discuss at Kentucky Downs from Saturday was the Turf Sprint Grade 3 event at 6 furlongs. And this one featured a blanket finish as Imprimis, who had run in this race last year, had a bit of a trip, kind of got mired down inside. Irad Ortiz was able to work out a much better trip for him this year as he was able to get into the clear at the top of the stretch and just ran down a couple of horses, Bombard and Front Run the Fed, who looked like they might have it wrapped up coming into the late stages of the race. But really all three hit the wire together in an exciting finish.
Yeah, it was quite a finish and good for Imprimis, who was disqualified last time in the Troy when he was clearly the best horse. And no, I'm not knocking the disqualification. I think we talked about it. I think it was a legit call, but he earned this win as well over a course with a lot of give in it by this time in the day. So he's shown he's really versatile. He ran another good number for him. He got a 121 here, same as he had run last time out. So just a really solid race from him. I'm not sure. I haven't had a chance to actually go back and watch this race and see what kind of trips there were in there. But given the bunch finish, I would imagine there had to be some. Did you see any in there?
I mean, I wouldn't say that I saw any horses that were really compromised by their trips. I mean, maybe if I was getting nitpicky, I would say that Joel Rosario might have overcommitted to the rail a little bit with Stubbins. I'm not sure that coming up the rail, as you got later in the day at Kentucky Downs, was really where you wanted to be making your move. We saw a lot of horses moving down the center of the racetrack, and Stubbins was kind of trying to slip up the inside and then get off the rail late. He got pretty close at the end. He ran fourth, beaten by less than a length, or beaten by less than 2 lengths, I should say, but just couldn't quite get there. The others, though, I didn't feel like they had big excuses. Maybe horses like Totally Boss and Kanthaka, maybe they just didn't really handle the turf course. That's always a built-in excuse when you've got a lot of rain like this coming down. But you kind of knew that Imprimis was a horse that would handle it. Just looking back through his PPs, he's actually a horse that won over that boggy turf course at Pimlico back in 2018 on Preakness Week when they got that torrential downpour, and the turf course was just producing times that were like 5 or 6 seconds slow for turf sprints. So he had been over very soft going before and handled it. So he definitely had the versatility to win over the conditions he saw on Saturday.
Yeah, and actually scrolling through his PPs, he ran a 127 that day at Pimlico, which is his career best that I see in all his races. So clearly he doesn't mind that soft course.
Yeah, and I should say this was a race that didn't feature an extremely fast pace. I thought it was a fair pace, and maybe that's why Bombard was able to hold on for second. Also, as I was mentioning in the prior race, sometimes horses that have a bit more stamina are able to do better when you've gotten a lot of give in the turf course, and Bombard was a horse that was cutting back from 1 mile races to the 6 furlongs, so that might have helped him a little bit to hold on for that dead heat in second. Let's talk about one more race from Kentucky Downs that took place earlier in the week, I believe on Wednesday. That was the $300,000 Tapit Stakes, a stakes event for horses that had not previously won a sweepstakes in their career. And Ramsey Solution caused a minor upset here. It was a pretty competitive race going in, but this horse took a pretty big step forward for Wesley Ward to get the job done in very fast time that I know we're not putting too much stock in the times to Kentucky Downs, but this horse definitely relished the harder turf conditions that he encountered.
Yeah, I should mention Kentucky Downs' timing with that new GPS. I'm timing all the races from video to compare them. They also have some crazy long run-ups at Kentucky Downs right now. Some of them were as much as a half furlong. It was just right there in the past performances. 330 feet run up, so that is a half furlong. I don't remember what exactly it was for this one, but it was another one that was really long. But it was a good effort from Ramsey Solution. He's come out of that digital age allowance race at Saratoga, which has proven to be a really strong race so far. And that, in fact, both the top two finishers did. He got a 122 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, so he's kind of thrust himself into looking as a horse who could be competitive if he moved into grade 3, maybe even grade 2 competition with that kind of number.
Yeah, he's a very lightly raced 4-year-old. He really hasn't had that many chances on the turf overall. He really came to prominence over the winter racing at Turfway Park with some improved speed figures for Wesley Ward, and he's now made 3 turf starts since then. He's continued to move forward with every start. So obviously there's still potential here for this horse to get better. He's probably going to be thrust into some graded stakes races soon off this performance, and I think they had every right to try those races because, as you said, he was coming out of a graded stakes level optional claiming race at Saratoga prior to this. And the speed figure he earned in this race certainly puts him in the mix against tougher company. Let's move up north of the border to Woodbine to discuss their Queen's Plate card on Saturday. We'll focus on 3 of the stakes races, and we'll begin with that main event, the Queen's Plate for the Canadian-bred 3-year-olds. And the focus here was really on the 2 favorites, the Colt and the Filly, Clayton and Curlin's Voyage. They did not show up with their best efforts, and Mighty Heart, who I know you liked a little bit, Craig, at a price, just totally stole the show, got to the front end and never looked back in a pretty impressive performance.
Yeah, it was. I should mention the numbers in our charts are wrong. I made a typo. I kind of give people a hard time for that, so I got to give myself a hard time here. It shows as an 88. It should actually be a 111. I transposed the variance for a couple races, so that'll all be fixed by tomorrow. But yeah, it was a good effort for Mighty Heart. It's kind of funny to say I was a little disappointed in the 13-1 because this horse was actually about 24-1, if I remember right, as they were approaching the gate, getting ready to start the race. So the 13-1 disappointed me when they hit the wire, but you could see the drop through the race. But that said, quite a performance by this horse. He just ran away from the field. It looked like the favorites were both making moves on the turn, and they just completely flattened out and had nothing left. Mighty Heart kicked away. I did note this morning in the chart that we do have the track coded in bright red as favoring speed. I haven't had a chance to review the card, but that's certainly something I would recommend people do and take a look and see if you agree with that, because as a horse who set what I would say was nothing but a moderate pace, if the track was truly favoring speed, it might be a little better than looked in the running line.
Now, I was not clever enough to pick Mighty Heart. I also was not clever enough to foresee that he would be on the lead in this race, because he certainly wasn't projected to be. But we did kind of talk a little bit about on the forecast last week how, despite the fact that a fast pace was showed in the pace projector for this race, there really weren't any confirmed front runners in this field. So the lead was kind of there for the taking. And in a big field, you don't often see slow paces, but whoever got to the front sort of had an opportunity to maybe slow things down a little bit, because there were a lot of horses that seemingly did not want to be on the lead. So credit to the rider here, Daisuke Fukumoto, who I know has had some success up in Canada. He also rode at Aqueduct over the winter, and I was a little bit impressed by his riding abilities. He booted home some long shots, got some horses to outrun the rods, and he really made a good decision here to put this horse in front and slow the pace down. And then he certainly had the horse underneath him to kick away in the late stages. I don't know where this horse can go from here. I don't even know a whole lot about his pedigree. He's by the low-profile sire Dramedy out of a City Place mare. But he certainly got the distance and seems like one with potential if he can transfer that form to either turf or dirt, or try some tougher spots in the future.
Yeah, and how about the Belichick running second at 26-1? The horse is still a maiden. He's run 3 times now, but quite the jump up from him. But he's going to run a figure over 100, which is obviously going to win most maiden races in Canada for sure. So big effort by him. And this kind of race just shows sometimes you got to go against the reputation, because even though we had 2 horses taking the majority of the money, they really didn't have much of a speed figure edge at all over anybody in this field.
It's kind of funny, actually. Josie Carroll had 3 horses in this race. Curlin's Voyage, who was one of the outright favorite in this race, and the top 2 finishers. And I think if you had said beforehand Josie Carroll was going to round out the exacta in this race, you wouldn't imagine that Curlin's Voyage would be the one that was out of the exacta, but she was, as the 2 long shots finished first and second here. I do want to say before we wrap up this race, Curlin's Voyage, you might want to give her an excuse, because she didn't break all that well, which is what she typically does. But after that, Patrick Husbands just had her stacked 4 wide around both turns. That's just a really tough trip, especially when you're trying to make up ground from the back of the pack. She just never saved an inch of ground and didn't really have any cover. That's just a really difficult trip, and she even almost got up for third in this race despite all of that. So she was never going to beat her stablemate, the winner, but she was probably the second best horse in this field. Let's move on to talk about a couple of other stakes races from Woodbine on Saturday. One of those was the Canadian, which was run a little bit before the Queen's Plate. Turf race going about 1.125 miles. The big favorite in here was Cambier Park, who was coming back for her 4-year-old debut, her first start since winning the Grade 1 Queen Elizabeth II at Keeneland last October. And she was legitimately 4-5 based on her past performances, but she was upset in here by a horse who found some improvement from I don't know where, because the winner Ride for the Cause, if you look for her prior efforts, she had never shown this kind of ability before, but she certainly ran in this race.
Yeah, she did. I'm not quite sure where this race come from. She's just kind of been a decent allowance horse, really. The few times she tried stakes, she had never really shown much of anything. But she did come in off a nice win, but only not much of a figure. She had only got a 103 for that win. But for this one on Saturday, she got a decent 113, which, to be fair, is pretty darn low for a grade 2 for older fillies and mares. I'm not even sure that would qualify as a grade 3 figure-wise. So it was a pretty weak race, and Cambier Park really didn't have much of an excuse. I mean, we do have the fractions coded in red as it being a fast pace, and she was up fairly close to those, but it's not like she was on the pace or contesting it. And given the quality of the field, she really should have won this race, and I can't find an excuse for her. Just a real weak edition of the grade 2 Canadian stakes, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't want to go so far as to say that Canberra Park is going to go on and be a Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf winner off of this performance, because she's got a lot to prove after losing as the favorite here. But I do think she had a legitimate excuse at this race. I mean, if you just watch the early portion of the race, she was really separated from the rest of the field, up dueling with a couple of horses who are bigger prices. And those two horses that she really went after on the backstretch, they finished last and second to last in this race and lost by 18 and 22 lengths. And it's not like those were horses that figured to lose by that much. I mean, they were 5-1 and 8-1 on the board. I think that just shows that the pace just completely fell apart in this race. And I did think that Canberra Park's rider moved way too soon and kind of took her off cover to make that early move up to those leaders on the backstretch just about a half a mile into the race. I think that was just getting a little bit too hasty, and she paid the price late. She probably still would have won this race, all things considered, if the winner hadn't taken that big step forward. But I would give Canberra Park a pass for this race.
Yeah, I guess I'm probably being a little too harsh, particularly since she was coming off the layoff. I was just disappointed in the figure mostly because with a quick pace, I would expect her to run a little bit better than a 111, but I guess I could be willing to give her another chance. I can buy your argument there.
Let's wrap up this Pacecast with one more stakes race to discuss from Woodbine that took place early in the day on Saturday. That was the King Corey going 5 furlongs on the turf course, the inner turf course, I should say. And Francatelli was the favorite coming in from out of town, and he just dominated some of the local horses in here, got to the front end, never looked back, and drew off without very little encouragement from the rider.
Yeah, this wasn't really a race I expected to talk about today, but when I looked and saw the figure he had run last time and what he ran, he got a 114 for this win Saturday. I figured he was worth giving a shout out. Pretty darn good 3-year-old sprinter. What's interesting for me with him is his two best races by far from a figure perspective had come in off the turf dirt races. He had run a 111 and 119, whereas 2 turf races hadn't been nearly as good. He had yet to hit the 100 mark. But he certainly did here. He showed that maybe his trainer does know what he's doing, keeping him on turf. He's been entered on turf all 5 times. And, just a good win. Showed high speed from the start, opened up a big lead, and just really cruised home. This is one of those rare times where I'd say he probably could have run a bigger figure if he'd have really been asked. Just a strong effort. Curious what they're going to do with this one, because he's definitely got some early speed, and at the very least, he's going to cause problems for any other speed horses.
Yeah, this horse was pretty impressive. When I saw his name in the rundown that you sent this week, I was kind of trying to rack my brain to see if I remembered this horse. And there was actually a race late in the meet at Saratoga where a Wayne Potts horse that shipped in from Monmouth won a New York bred race, causing a bit of an upset. And I remember watching that horse's replays in Monmouth and noting in one of his replays in what didn't come back as the fastest race. He had just been beaten by a horse that looked really impressive and was one that I kind of made a mental note to follow, even though he didn't run the fastest time, and that was Francatelli. And he got back on the turf for the first time since that race, and obviously was able to transfer that good off the turf form back to the turf for this race. He clearly can run on either surface, which you often get from the progeny of City Zip. And yeah, as you say, it'll be interesting to see where they go from here, because they've got a right to try some tougher company pretty soon, and he's certainly running speed figures now that suggest he could be up to the task. Well, that's all the racing to recap for this week. It was kind of a light week in terms of racing around the country. We had to focus on some venues we don't often talk about too much, Kentucky Downs and Woodbine. In the upcoming weeks, we'll get back to some of the bigger racing, and as well as some Breeders' Cup preps. Belmont will be starting up this week. I know they delayed the start of Santa Anita by 1 week until September 25th due to the wildfire situation out in California. So hopefully we get those stakes races in pretty soon. But we'll definitely do the TimeformUS forecast later this week, I believe on Friday. I imagine we could talk about some of the Belmont racing. The Belmont Oaks Invitational is the feature race on Saturday there, so we'll see how that field comes up when we get there. But thanks for listening this week to the TimeformUS Pacecast. Remember, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back with the TimeformUS forecast on Friday.